All. This is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So today with us, we have our own Paul Bork, and we're going to talk about COVID. So Paul, take it away.
Thank you, Mobeen.
And do you want me to share?
Where did I put it? I have your thing on. So I have it. This is my mistake. Just a second, I get it. Uh,
Okay, so while Paul sets it up,
yep,
I'm going to.
I should be back. Okay.
Okay, excellent. We are
Sorry, I was
there.
just responding to some text in the discussion at the beginning, and then the sound comes through, and so that was my mistake. So, all right. So we're looking at whether the CDC is actually responding to some of the comments we made, and it may not be us, it may be someone else, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So this is an update, and the summary is sort of COVID remains well behaved, and we'll talk about how it is and what's happening. It's not over, it's still dangerous for some, and a little risk for all of us. And it continues to change, so the effect is slowly decreasing, and it's a slow decrease, and it seems to be well behaved. And let me know if there's any questions.
Will do.
Why did it do that? Okay, I need to do this one. Why are you doing that? No. Okay. It went to the end rather than, okay, so the summary is as pretty much as before, it's all quiet, it's not over, we're past the beginning of the end, we're not at the end, and can we see if its lethality is changing? And we can. Here are the 4 quick CDC overviews they have, and the test positivity, the trend in percent emergency, hospital rate, and the deaths, and you can see they're all sort of bouncing and heading downward. And it looks like in the hospitalization and the deaths, it's not as low as it had been before. This slide I showed you before, when I took all the data points that they had, the actual data points for the death and for the emergency department admissions, and plotted them, and I showed you the scale, and we have one over here and the other, and trying to line them up and see where they go. And so now this was the old slide we had, and this is the new one, and you can see we have just this part here, new. And I didn't go back and redo all their data because I think their data is pretty much the same sort of thing I had, but I wanted to be sure how it came out. So again, one of the things that I'm looking at for the lethality is looking at deaths divided by the percent ED admission. And the relative height of these curves is, you can change it around. It's random based on what multiplier that I use. But here we can see that the ratio of the little to the big, and here the little to the big is less. Here it's less lethal, 910. And here it's 960. And so we're doing the same sort of thing, looking at the same characteristic. And to remind you, we're only looking at it at peaks or troughs, because there's a time difference between when people get in the hospital and when they die. And at the peak and trough, we tend to not have an increasing or decreasing COVID, so that the comparison is more apt to be more accurate. And also, if we keep the same characteristic from time to time that we look at it, it should be less biased than it might be otherwise. But obviously right here, the peak on one and the peak on the other is moved over by a little bit, but it's relatively even when that occurs. Does that make sense to everybody? And again, if we look back at the slide, it says provincial here. And the reason it's provincial is because they changed the data. And this was what I looked at last time, look at the change over time. And after about 3 months, it settles down, but there are some changes that occur at various points. And here are the two characteristics. And you can see the death seems to have a surge that occurs in a given time frame. It may be an audit that's going on or whatever. I did not look at that again, but just keep in mind that the data towards the end, recent data may end up being adjusted by the CDC. Here are the data points. We added 2 more from before the last time. And I've got, again, the percent ED and the deaths. And I, again, took it off the existing graph. So this is all current. And so the peak that we had for cycle A may be different than the numbers that I reported before. In fact, they will be a little different. And, for all of them, but they're taken off the same graph. So we're comparing the same thing. And part of the reason to do it is that the CDC has a live database and they update things. And so if they change the way they counted something, we don't want to have, have A through E based on one of the CDC techniques and the last 2 data points based on a different methodology. And then the one question someone can say, well, I'm talking about both peaks and troughs. Well, this is new. We haven't talked about this before, but the reasons to do it is, first, there's an error check to any conclusion, because if you don't have both the troughs and the peaks moving the same way on lethality, it may be that something different is going on. Second, we get about twice as many data points because we may not have a peak and trough the same way. We could be off by 1. And third, it adds clarity that the peaks and the troughs might be responding differently, and we don't have any theory. And if I'm doing curve fitting with one set of data, you can look and say this fits best. But if we look at the peaks and the troughs and they have different types of curves that fits, it may be that there's some systematic, there may be some systematic reason why one curve fitting works better than the other. So it helps us be cautious. And we always need to be doubly cautious and extrapolating, going outside of the data rather than inside the data time frame. And so when we talk about what's going to happen at the end and what happens in the future, we're extrapolating, and we want to be really cautious because there may be something happening right around the corner that the current data doesn't pick up. So that being said, here we go. Here are the peaks. This is a curve. We have another data point here, and our correlation is still amazing. 95% of the variation is explained by the progression of going to 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is just looking at deaths. The deaths are decreasing over time. And it's a power curve. And a power curve means that it isn't going to hit 0 ever. And it takes about 5 more cycles or 30 more months to end up cutting in half. The rate comes down, similar to an exponential where you get a lot of decrease and then it flattens out and it takes a long, long time. And exponential would be where this would be e to the x would make sense. And this here is a power curve where the x variable is the time moving in. An exponential would have x up in the exponent. So it's a similar shaped curve, but not an exponential, which is what you'd expect, but the curve fits better here. And so that's all I'm doing is the curve fitting, because I don't have any theory or reason to know that if it's exponential, what either of the numbers mean. And so this represents the peaks represent the most active time of COVID. So it's when COVID is more like at the beginning of it. And it makes it easier to see how the disease and humanity have adapted to each other as we go forward. And here I talked about peaks 1 through 7, and this is 7 and going down to show if we're going to go from 900 to half of it. That's 12. And so this is just taking this curve and just plugging numbers in. And this supports the conclusion that the half as many dying on the peaks will take about 5 more cycles or 30 more months is what the data shows. Okay. Now, if we look at the troughs and the deaths, it looks a lot more like it's linear. And here we have a lot more of what I would expect with data, and certainly national data and health data, that the correlation is about 75%. That's still amazingly high. That the death rate, as reported by the CDC, the increment going forward one at a time on the troughs explains 75% of the variation. I think that's just amazing. And this says about 520 fewer people die from each COVID cycle than the COVID cycle before, if we go in. And you can see the line coming down, and if it came straight, we would hit it zero from the line right about here, but putting this number in, it'll take a while to get down. And so this represents the least active time of COVID, and this is perhaps more like what'll happen when it's endemic. Will it cycle like the flu? Will it be just a consistent exposure? I don't think anybody knows that. And is this going to be a forever disease, or it will be a burned out disease that goes away? And in 20 years, people are digging up remains to try to get samples like they did with the 1919 influenza. They went to some of the Inuit where people had been buried in permafrost, and they were able to extract some of the virus there. And why? I mean, they had medical reasons to do it, and the tribe agreed, and they did it respectfully. But I'm just saying, we've had some diseases which seem to go away or become way different. And this one, again, we don't know where it will go. But again, we have 75%. And here, if we look at, this is the peaks, this is the ratio that we have. If we look at it linearly, we have a 44% correlation. If I look at an exponential type curve, we get to 48%. And if I do a log curve, we get to 55%. So it's 11% better fit, basically, from a linear. And so the question is, it looks pretty linear, but this is a better fit, and it probably means something. We don't know what it is. And you notice when I talked about before, we had the alternating data points, one above, one below, one above, one below, one above, one below, one above. It's probably a reporting thing that's causing it. And if we fix the reporting error, because it's probably over-reporting, under-reporting, over-reporting, under-reporting. And if we got the right number for either the emergency department admissions or the death, the curve would probably fit better. And so one of the things when you're looking at raw data and you find that, it usually means there's something else going on that if removed would actually help. From the Bahamas. So, and it's definitely decreasing lethality on what I'm measuring, and it's decreasing at a slightly lowering rate. And the COVID seems to be well-behaved, continuing to affect people less. And you notice the correlation is less here with the deaths per emergency room than it was with just the deaths. And so that's meaning something is changing in the lethality, because if they were both the same and it was just as lethal, then this curve would look just like the other one. And the fact that there's less spread is actually good news. As a less fit is good news. It means something different is happening with the emergency room admissions versus the deaths. And so what that is probably a decrease in lethality, not just a decreased number of people dying, but the people that go in the emergency room versus dying is different. Now, does that mean, that doesn't mean that people who get the disease versus dying is the same. And it doesn't mean anything else. It's just the emergency department admissions versus deaths. So you're less likely over time, each cycle, of dying if you get in the emergency room. And there's also a less likelihood you're getting in the emergency room. Okay, jumping on, now looking at the troughs and the deaths, okay? Here, if we look at the power curve gets a 12% better fit. And so it probably means something. It looks like it's pretty linear, but the power curve fit is much higher. And for 12% additional, it usually means the power curve is really theoretically a better fit. It's not just doing curve fitting. And we have enough data points that that this is probably something real. And whether it's actually this type of curve, or it's an exponential or something, it probably means that it's not linear that's going on, and we wouldn't expect it to be linear, where every day steps closer to it. We would expect it to be less and less and less as it goes out. So that's what this first one means. We still have we still have close to 80% of the variation is consistent with the power curve here. And if we go up, okay, we have about 90% when we look at all of the data points. If I take this one data point off and say, hey, the bottom looks pretty linear, is it linear? It isn't. It still is a curve. And so again, with the troughs, the death to emergency department, we have about a 90% correlation, which again, for data, I think is just an amazing fit. And we have a 5% lower correlation than just for deaths, and it supports COVID becoming less lethal. Death is different from being sick as measured by an emergency department admission. Here's an old slide that was a little worrisome. That last time, remember, the 0 to 10 cohort jumped way up here and here on these last two peaks. Well, if we take a look at the data from the last one, first they shoved the old data out so you can't see it, but you can see that it's back where we thought it should be, with the real young people being less in the emergency room. So whatever happened here in this peak is not continuing to happen. So it's not a disease that's beginning to go after 1 to 10-year-olds. It's 1 to 11-year-olds. It's maybe there was something in the news or something that caused people to have more admissions there. And given the low rate, it may be that just a few people push the curve up. So, and this here is percent of emergency department visits that are COVID, and they have it for the various age groups, as you can see. Talking about vaccines, shifting focus, remember this slide where they had PK2 and the JN1 were the two that they were going to focus the new COVID vaccine on. I don't know if that's used, but those were the two that CDC approved.
So John says that big peak happened in the middle of the summer?
Yep. Well, July, yeah, August, that's where this one was. And this one is January, and the young kids are down. So it may have to do with the cold weather, may not. I did not look to see which states were involved or what.
Understood. Thank you.
So now if we take a look, these two right here are the two that they talked about for the vaccine. I think they used the JN1, but if they use the XEC variant class, these are the two. And these two are the two that are currently active. So they really not closely related in this variant class tree that the CDC has put up. And here we are. You can see just like before, we had expanding and decrease. Then we had this one expanding and decrease. Then we have this one expanding just like before. And these are the top two with the colors that I have back here. So it's just continuing to evolve, and we're continuing to have less lethality. As far as I know, no treatment or migration of where the disease is in the respiratory system has occurred. If we quickly go to the next strain, we have the same thing as before, where we have a relatively flat, low migration in each class, some of it higher, and then we have a step up, a jump. And so overall, this is the slope of the variations. None of the variants are looking anywhere near that many changes going on, but the 30 subs. Remember, at some point it was up to 38, and I kept saying, looks like each one is flat, and then something occurs like a class shift, just like your antibodies that do a class shift, that you're making your IgM or IgMG, and then you make a class shift and everything changes. It looks like this is proceeding the same sort of thing. going along with these few mutations. Then there's a jump with lots of mutations, and it continues slow, but something is jumping up periodically. And it looks like, there's some blue in here, but it looks like we may be getting, what they call a new variant group or not. It's not more variations going on. And so again, we may get this fine-tuned where any variation will be going back to something that didn't work as well before and not be as dominant, and that virant class may just die out. But anyway, nothing to worry about. It's doing the same thing as before and maybe even better controlled. Going to wastewater, and this is where the CDC may listen to us or listen to someone else, because I'm pretty sure whatever we said, other people are saying too. If you look at the slope, just the slope from the peaks overall may be parallel to this, and the recent peaks going down even more abruptly. They have this in the low category, and you see they have 5 different groups here. Last time they had 10. I said it doesn't make any sense to have 10 different things to make a decision. You can't. There's no real distinction. You don't need that. And they have come and they have reduced it to 5, because each one of these was divided.
They were listening to you.
You divide it into upper and lower half. It's like, that's like the Army. You're a second lieutenant, top half, bottom. Anyway, it seemed like when they first got it going, people studying stuff very closely can say, well, I can make this distinction, and then does it make any difference? But so maybe they're listening. If they are, I thank them for making the change, because really, what's the difference between low upper class or lower class in terms of telling, how are people going to respond? No.
Yeah.
And see, this is what the curve looked like. And this way. And we have this other little hump, and it's definitely less. Each one is coming down by about the same amount. It looks pretty linear coming down. And if it was, it would say, right about there, 3 more out and we'll be done. No, it's going to level off. It's going to be like a power curve or exponential, I think, coming down, but it's definitely getting less. But you can see the low points. These 2 low points were lower than any of the other points. And so again, it may turn out just to become a continued infection, and it just becomes something that's always there. And then how does the CDC, just a quick review, remember that for SARS, it was 6 months of data, and they were looking in the past 12 months and and for influenza, they're looking for 12 months versus 6, and over the last 12 months versus 18. So the way they measure it is different for various diseases. So if you look and you go look at the CDC equivalent slides for wastewater, for influenza or RSV, they're calculated differently. Why? I don't know. They're having a different thing. There's probably a good science reason for it, but it's something brand new, and they're probably trying to be more responsive. So just saying, if you look at it and people get excited about where the curve is or whatever, if they were doing influenza, it might be a much flatter curve or something. Okay, and that's another old slide. And then here, if we remember when we are talking about comparing it to the flu, as some people did early on, before looking at the data, it was 120% more lethal, just a little bit more lethal than the 2019, 2020 flu, which was a moderate cycle. If I had picked a more deadly cycle, it would have been less. So it's in the range of the flu, and it continues to get down. So now is it at 100%? Is it at a little under 100? It's somewhere around there going down. So it continues oscillating. Some people are still getting sick. People are still dying. We have new variant classes coming in, and that's how the reinfection reoccurs. No change in the treatment protocols. Again, long COVID and vaccine, we don't know the risks. And again, Tim Spector had the best data, and I still have seen nothing saying slightly more than 10 about 10% get infected, and each infection has a little bit higher rate. So that's the best information I had from the Dr. Tim Spector. So again, it's not over. Still dangerous still significantly dangerous for some, a little dangerous for all, or inconvenient, and continue to change. So the effect is slowly decreasing, but that's occurring slowly, and it seems to be well behaved. And that's what I have. Any questions or comments from the audience?
So thank you so much. And I was showing something to Paul. Sorry, Paul, just a quick comment.
Okay.
I did these couple of discussions about vaccine because there are some latest studies that are coming out which have a possibility of us understanding vaccine side effects and the diagnostics for that and possibly solutions for that. You know that I've been looking for these solutions from the day one.
Right.
And some folks wrote underneath saying, we were waiting for Dr. Bean to wake up after 5 years, thankfully. And I was looking at my videos with Paul just before the talk. My first talk, which I have now hidden because of YouTube, my first talk about vaccine issues was March 30, 2021. Vaccines came out in December. This was the first talk in March. I remember the heat I got. And the title was AstraZeneca Vaccine Causes Clotting, German Study. So people have been waiting for me for 5 years, and I've been discussing this from the 4th month of the vaccinations. Anyways, we'll continue to do our discussions. I have a question though. Sorry for a COVID stats discussion. I'm asking a different type of a question. I hope you don't mind, Paul. Just a quick question. Long COVID discussions and vaccine side effects discussion. There are so many new studies, I think about 400, that have talked about diagnostics and solutions. Would you like me to discuss them? If so, please write that in the comment. And if not, then I'll move on to nutrition and diabetes and other medical concepts. So with this, thank you very much. And if you would like to support this work as well, there are links in the description for buy me a coffee, PayPal, Patreon, Substack, etc. So with this, thank you very much and have a good evening. Paul, thank you very much for presenting.
Quite welcome.
Bye, everyone.